In this session, we'll continue with ingestion. So, yesterday we were studying about ingestion, where we studied the role played by the tongue and by the teeth. And we also figured out that the food that is mixed with the saliva and is swallowed is called the bolus. So, bolus is nothing but food plus the saliva. It's a ball of food in simple terms. Ball of food. Now we are going to continue understanding ingestion, which is the first step in nutrition in human beings. Let us recall again. There are 5 steps in nutrition in human beings. The first step is ingestion. The second is digestion. The third is absorption. The fourth is assimilation. And the last step is egestion. So today we'll finish off ingestion. So once the food has moved down the mouth, I hope all of you realize the role played by the tongue and the teeth in the process of ingestion, and also the role of saliva, which is produced by salivary glands. The primary role of saliva is to moisten the food so that the bolus can be made, the ball of food can be made. So once this food is inside this food pipe here, it has to be moved down. And where is the target of this bolus now? Where is the location that this bolus should travel to? It should reach the stomach. Now, the food that is in the food pipe does not fall under the force of gravity as you might think. Just because we are standing upright, the food does not move downwards because gravity is pulling it down. There is a different kind of a force which is produced by our own body. Well, you can experiment it back home. You can do a little headstand. You can stand on your head. I ask you not to do it, but just in case if you're curious. So you can do a little headstand, and then you can try eating something, chew it and swallow it. The food will still move into your tummy against the force of gravity. How does this happen? This happens because of the unique structure of the esophagus and the entire digestive system. Now here we have the food pipe or the esophagus, and if I cut this pipe like this, I get a small section. You see this section? If I put this section here, this is how my food pipe looks. So this is the hollow part of the food pipe where the food travels from, where the bolus basically travels from. So the bolus will travel inside this hollow tube. And what do you see outside is that the wall of the esophagus, the divar, the wall of the esophagus, the inner wall of the esophagus, it has got folds. You see folds like these here. So why does esophagus has folds? So that it can expand. It is not like a plastic tube, rigid and solid. Rather, it is folded so that the more food you put, the more this esophagus can expand, and that is why it is folded. Folds increase the surface area. Surface area. We'll discuss this sometime later. So now the inner wall of the esophagus is highly folded so that it can accommodate more food. If we swallow more food, if the bolus is large sized, you can still swallow a larger piece of bolus. And that is why you must have observed that whether you take a small bite or a large bite, you can push even larger bolus particles inside your food pipe. It is because it is flexible. It has a highly folded inner wall. Let us look at the other structure, other feature of the esophagus. Now you see this muscularis. You don't have to remember this term muscularis or any other term that is given here. You don't have to remember any of these. But remember that the inner wall is highly folded and the walls, the outer wall. So this is the outer wall of the esophagus and this is the inner wall of the esophagus. Let me write the spellings again a little neatly. And the inner. So in between the outer wall of the esophagus and the inner wall of the esophagus, we've got muscularis, which is nothing but lots of muscles. Muscles, the same kind of muscles that you have in your arms or in your legs, but these muscles are unique is that they are not under your complete control. Our brain controls these muscles. Our brain has a control over these muscles. So what do these muscles do? What are they doing in the esophagus? These muscles, they contract and expand. So what they do is, so if this is the esophagus, these muscles will squeeze the esophagus like this, somewhat like this. And so for example, this is the bolus here in the esophagus. Let's say this is the bolus in the esophagus. So what will the muscles do? The muscles will contract. The muscles will contract and squeeze the food pipe such that a pressure is developed on the bolus and the bolus is pushed down. Once the bolus reaches a lower position, the muscles around the esophagus here, they squeeze, and they push this bolus down. So the contraction and relaxation of the muscles around the esophagus or inside the walls of the esophagus push the bolus towards the stomach. I hope this function of the esophagus is clear to you. Now, once the bolus reaches the entry point of the stomach here, the stomach doesn't allow the bolus to enter, and we'll see why in the next slide. So I hope you've understood the process of ingestion, which starts from the mouth, which involves the dentition, human dentition, the human tongue, and the esophagus. So I hope you've understood the role of these structures. Now we'll move to the next part, or the second stage of nutrition in human beings. Let's call it stage 2. There are a total of 5 stages. The next stage is called digestion. And what are the different parts of the human digestive system, or the organs of the human digestive system that are involved in digestion? So the first part is an accessory organ called the salivary glands. I hope you remember salivary glands. I hope you remember also the term accessory organs of the digestive system. Accessory organs. Now, accessory organs, just to recall, are those organs of the digestive system which do not come in contact with the food, do not come in contact with food directly. These are called accessory organs, and most of the times accessory organs also play some other role other than digestion. For example, salivary glands also play certain role in protecting our body from bacteria or other pathogens that enter into our body, but we don't need to know that at the moment. So the first organ that is involved in digestion are the salivary glands, the second is the stomach, the third is the small intestine, and then we have other accessory organs which are indirectly involved in digestion but are extremely important, namely liver, gallbladder, and pancreas. So let us also define what is digestion once again so that it becomes easy for us. So ingestion is taking the food inside the body, and digestion is nothing more than breaking of complex food or complex nutrients in food into simpler nutrients. Alright, so we'll just take a little more time. We'll spend a little more time today discussing complex nutrients and simple nutrients. Let us discuss them slightly in slight more details. Now, I hope everybody knows the 4 different classes of 4 major groups of nutrients. We got carbohydrates, we've got proteins, fats, and we got vitamins and minerals. Now, vitamins and minerals are kind of simple. They can be used as they are absorbed by the body. They can be used as they are most of the times. But carbohydrates, let's use a green marker. Carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, the ones that we take inside our body through food, are most of the times complex. We'll see to an example of these. Now, just like a house, we've done this before, a building, a house is made up of many things. Think about what a house is made up of. It is made up of brick and cement and sand and iron bars and glass and wood and so on, right? Similarly, carbohydrates are of also various types. We got something called a simple carbohydrate like glucose. So glucose you can consider like a brick in the house. Just like we got bricks in a house, glucose is a very simple kind of a carbohydrate. Other simple carbohydrates are, let us say, we got lactose, right? So we have got many other simple carbohydrates. Now these simple carbohydrates combine and they make complex carbohydrates. Complex carbohydrates, an example of a complex carbohydrate is starch. Another complex carbohydrate can be glycogen. Now you don't have to remember so many, but you should remember at least one. So starch is a complex carbohydrate. Glucose is a simple carbohydrate. Our body through food is getting complex nutrients. We are getting complex carbohydrates, we are taking in complex proteins, we are taking complex fats, and we cannot use them directly. So we have to break them down into simpler carbohydrates. Now, proteins are made up of simple substances called amino acids. Our body cannot use the proteins that we eat directly. For example, the pulses that you eat, like the kidney beans or the black grams or the moong dal, etc., or eggs or meat or fish, the proteins that we eat, our body cannot directly use them. These proteins are complex. They are very complicated in their structure, and they must be broken down into amino acids. And once we digest the proteins and convert them into amino acids, we can use these amino acids to make proteins of our own choice. See, our body does not have the same proteins the plants have. Likewise, fats, complex fats, or any particular fat is made up of two things. A fat is made up of fatty acids, and glycerol. So once we break down fats, we get fatty acids and glycerol, and we can use both of them to make fats of our own choice, right? So let me just rub this off, and I'm going to simplify it a little further. Let's write it a little clearly. So food gives us complex nutrients. Let's just write it down somewhere here. So food, and this is really amazing, my marker is playing funny. So food is made up of complex nutrients, right? What are those complex nutrients? We've got complex carbohydrates. Example of a complex carbohydrate is, you must remember, starch, one. We've got complex proteins, and we've got complex fats. When I say fats, I mean oils, and so oils are liquid fats, huh? And then solid fats like ghee and butter. Okay, so oils and solid fats. So fats means oils and solid fats like butter and ghee, etc. So these are all complex nutrients. In order to use them, we need to break them down. So then the process of digestion takes place. Digestion. And our body performs the, so let me just rub it a bit. So our body has to break these three. And what are these three complex nutrients broken into? Carbohydrates are broken into something, proteins are broken into something, and fats are broken into something. Can you recall what they are broken into? Carbohydrates are broken into, you can simply call them simple, simple carbohydrates. I'm not going to give you a scientific name for them, or else you'll get confused. So at this moment you should only remember that carbohydrates are broken into simple carbohydrates. An example of a simple carbohydrate is glucose. For example, glucose. Proteins are broken down into amino acids, so that we can make proteins of our own choice, the proteins that make our body. And fats are broken into fatty acids and glycerol. So if you still have a little confusion, let's go back. Let us say I give you Qutub Minar to build your own house. Now Qutub Minar, which is in Delhi, is made up of, now this is the weirdest, ugliest Qutub Minar that you will ever see. But let us say this is the Qutub Minar. Now if I ask you to build your house using this, Qutub Minar will have not bricks but large pieces of stones. And in order to use these stones to build your house, you will have to work on them, and you have to make them simpler. You'll have to make them smaller. You have to cut them out into shapes that you need. And that is the same logic behind digestion. When we are digesting food, we are breaking complex carbohydrates which made the bodies of other plants or animals into simple substances which we can use to make our own bodies. And this is what digestion is all about. So I hope you've understood what complex nutrients are converted into. You must remember these. Let's go to the next part and let us start with digestion. Now digestion starts in the mouth. The first thing you must remember, digestion does not start anywhere else but in the mouth. The process of breaking down food, the complex nutrients in food, into simpler nutrients starts in the mouth. But what is digested there? So let us look at the organs that are involved. So salivary glands are involved in digestion in the mouth. Now let us try to understand what do we understand by the word glands. So at your level you should only remember that glands are a kind of organs. They are a kind of organs. They're just a kind of organ. Just remember that. So don't call them salivary organs, just call them salivary glands. As you grow up, we'll teach you what glands are in greater details. Now, where are salivary glands located? We've said that they are located in the mouth, but when you move your tongue in your mouth, you cannot feel them, you cannot find them anywhere. So let us look into this diagram here. And you see this is one of the salivary glands. Forget about these names that are written around, don't be worried about them, but just look at this. So this is one big gland just in front of your ear, but you can't even feel it with your finger because it is under your skull, it is behind your jaw bones. So this is the lower jawbone, and it is just behind the jawbone. It is hidden there, and this is one of the salivary glands. Then we have another salivary gland which is somewhere at the back of your floor of your mouth. So this is the floor of our mouth, and this is the roof of our mouth here. Let me just draw them. So this is the roof of our mouth, and this is the floor of our mouth. So at the back of the floor of our mouth, so let me just write it as the roof of the mouth, and let me write it as the floor of the mouth. So at the back of the floor of the mouth, we have got another salivary gland, and there's a third salivary gland. So this is number one, which is is behind your jawbone. Another one is at the back of the floor of the mouth, and we have another one under the tongue. So number 2 and number 3. So I hope the locations of these 3 salivary glands are clear to you. The first salivary gland is behind the jawbone, right? The other one is at the back under the floor of the mouth, at the back of the mouth under the floor of the mouth, and the third is under the tongue. Now these glands have been given names. I don't want you to remember those names. You should only remember how many glands we have. So This gland here is called sublingual. Lingual means tongue, sub means under, but you don't have to remember it. So under the tongue, gland under the tongue. Similarly, we got something called as submandibular. Mandible is this bone, and this gland is under this bone, so we call it sub, which means under. Submandibular gland. You don't have to remember that. And this is the parotid gland, but don't ask me what parotid is. At the moment, we should not be discussing those things. So we got three glands. Now, one more thing. This parotid gland, we don't have one, but two glands. One is onto the left hand side, just in front of your ear, and the other is onto the right hand side, just in front of your ear. So we've got a total of two parotid glands, one sublingual gland, and one submandibular gland. So how many glands should you tell us that there are? At your level, only say that there are three salivary glands. And where are they present? They are present under the tongue, under the back of the mouth, under the floor of the back of the mouth, and just in front of the ear. Right? So we have done the location and the number of these salivary glands. Now let us look at the parts of these glands. All of these glands have some parts. Now you see that these glands, these organs, are made up of grape-like structures. Okay, lots of grape or marble-like structures, they are stuck together. This is how it appears. Now inside of this, or inside of these glands are factories that produce special chemicals. So they are factories that produce chemicals. And what are those chemicals that they produce called? That chemical, the collection of those chemicals is called saliva. So all these three glands produce saliva. And what is the composition of saliva? We'll look into it in just a moment. So at the moment we are just trying to understand the structure of the glands. So the structure of each salivary gland is, we have the gland, and then we have a tube. Can you see this tube? This tube here? And can you see this long tube? Right? So why does this gland have a tube? Any guesses? Try thinking. So the glands are connected to these tubes so that saliva that is produced inside, let's use a yellow color to show saliva, so that the saliva that is produced inside here can be released into the mouth. So the saliva is released by this gland, and it is released just on top of our upper jaw. In the upper jaw, where we have got the molars and premolars, there is a tiny little hole on both the sides which you can't see. It is just there where the saliva is released in our mouth. So you don't have to exactly tell me where the saliva is released in the upper part, but you should know that saliva is released into the mouth. Now the lower two glands, salivary glands, this gland, the saliva that it makes, it sends it here to the next gland, and the next gland, both of them have a common tube. You see, this is a common tube for both of them, and both of them pour their saliva into this common tube, and this saliva is released just under our tongue. So if you raise your tongue, under the tongue you can see a little structure like this, and under this structure is a tiny hole. I want you to go to the mirror once this class is over. Go in front of the mirror, turn on the lights, and raise your tongue and try to look at this tiny hole. And it is through this hole under the tongue that the saliva comes out. So saliva is released into the mouth by these tubes, and these tubes are called these tubes, both these tubes. Let's use a green marker, and this tube here, let's rub it off first so that it becomes a little more clean. And these tubes that we see here and this here are called the salivary ducts. Duct is an opening. So the saliva travels through these tubes, and then there are these tiny holes through which the saliva comes out into the mouth, and these holes are called salivary ducts, or the openings. Now this is something that you must remember: salivary glands, salivary ducts, and saliva. How many salivary glands we have? 3 in total, and the parts we have discussed. So now let us move to the next aspect of the salivary gland. Now salivary gland releases saliva. And what is the composition of saliva? Which means, when I say composition, what do I mean? I mean to say, what is saliva made up of? What does it contain? Now Saliva contains a couple of things. It contains a very important protein. This is the most important thing that the saliva has. It is a special protein, but let's not call it a special protein. It is a special protein, that is true, but let us call it, it contains a digestive enzyme. Digestive enzyme. Now we've done already what an enzyme is. Enzymes are special proteins that perform special functions. And what function salivary amylase executes? It digests the food. It performs digestion. Now the name of this enzyme is only amylase. But why do we use the word salivary? Because this enzyme called amylase is present in the saliva. So the first component that makes the saliva is a digestive enzyme called salivary amylase. What else is inside the saliva? Inside the saliva we have a lot of water, we have variety of salts, and you got many other molecules that you do not need to know at this stage of your class. Now, but this is the most important thing that you must remember, that it contains salivary amylase. Now, what is the function of saliva? Now, the function of the saliva, number one, is to soften the food. Now, I'm sure all of you've eaten some hard food items. For example, you must have eaten almonds, and you must have eaten some, let us say, also not just hard foods, but also hard and dry foods. I'm sure you people must have tasted and liked skimmed milk powder. Who doesn't like it? So when we eat foods, when we eat food of any kind, the food is dry and the food is usually hard. So we basically chew it and crush it using our teeth, and then we mix saliva into the food. And what happens? This makes saliva turns this hard and dry food into a soft paste. And then this paste can be rolled into a ball. And what rolls the food into a ball? Our tongue also helps in this. Our tongue rolls the food into a ball with the help of saliva. So saliva has moistened and softened the food for swallowing, and the important function of the saliva is in the formation of bolus. What is bolus? Once again, food mixed with saliva. It's a paste. It's a paste-like substance which is made up of food and saliva. Right, so this is bolus. So the first function of saliva is to soften the food so that the swallowing of bolus can become easy. The second function, which is basically the more important function of saliva, is digestion of starch. And I'm not sure whether we have the slide for that, but we can always bring the image, for which you'll just have to wait. So let us just open up a new page and let me bring across an image. Let us drag an image of here, control yes. So we have an image right here, and this is what starch is and what amylase does. So you see, starch is a complex molecule. See, it is made up of so many, these all red dots are nothing but glucose molecules, and so many of them are connected to each other. Now the saliva that is released from here, I hope you can see the marker here, the saliva that is released by the salivary glands into the mouth, which contains the enzyme amylase. This digestive protein called amylase acts on starch and breaks it down, and the starch is broken down. So here we got so many glucose molecules, and amylase breaks down starch into a simpler carbohydrate molecule which is called maltose. So amylase breaks down starch into maltose, and maltose is made up of 2 glucose units each. So this is one molecule of maltose, it has got 2 glucose units, 2 glucose, 2 glucose, 2 glucose. So digestion has started in the mouth. A complex carbohydrate called starch has been broken down into maltose. And let us get back to our previous slide. So I hope this much is clear to you, whatever we've done so far. And tomorrow we will continue with digestion, and we'll see the functions performed by the stomach, the small intestine, and other accessory organs.